Well, a very warm welcome, everyone, to this latest webinar for the Kohima Educational Trust. I'm just going to say a few words of welcome as everyone joins. We've got 70 in the waiting room now, and about 160 have signed up for tonight, which is fabulous. Well, you're in for a treat tonight. We've got a double act. Um, and with Duncan Gilmour and Richard Duckett. You know Richard Duckett very well, and you'll be introduced to Duncan for the first time, but he's the grandson of Britain's greatest SOE commander. I love that subtitle of the book, and I think it's absolutely right. Um, we've got people from all over the world as usual. We've got some old friends and some new ones. So if you're new to this, then very warm welcome. And I think that's about all for me as I hand over to Sylvia.
Well, it's never enough from you, Rob, but you'll be back in a minute. So, hello again, everyone, and welcome to what will be our last webinar for 2025. It has been a very full and exciting year for KET, and we're so pleased that you've come along with us for the ride. So, welcome everyone tonight. We've got big news to impart tonight, so please do stay with us at the end of the webinar so that you can be the first to hear what we have been up to. But first, tonight is all about Colonel Peacock. In 1940, aged 46, Edgar Peacock lied about his age and enlisted as a private, ending the war as a highly decorated Special Forces Lieutenant Colonel who had conceived, planned and led the most successful guerrilla operation of the Second World War, Operation Character. He was born in India in 1893. Edgar missed the First World War due to his employment in Burma's jungles as a forestry manager, a job he continued in between the wars. His knowledge of the area came in very handy when his work began with SOE's India mission in the contested no man's land of the Kabaw Valley. But to tell us his story in much more detail tonight, I'm delighted to welcome back Dr Richard Duckett and to introduce Duncan Gilmour, Edgar Peacock's grandson. It is thanks to Duncan that we can tell Colonel Peacock's story, as he allowed Richard exclusive access to the family files, resulting in the book Jungle Warrior. Richard, I hope, needs little introduction, as this is his third KET event. Thank you, Rich. Starting the year for us with our first 2025 webinar on SOE in Burma, and then hosting our Evening of Remembrance in York in June. As ever, it's wonderful to have Robert Lyman here. He is just back from another trip to Kohima, and I will now pass over to him to give Duncan the introduction he deserves. Incidentally, Duncan is on a boat in the Celebes Sea, heading south for Indonesia, where it is 4 a.m. So thanks, Duncan, for making such an early start for us. As ever, please feel free to use the chat button, and any questions you have, it will be helpful if you can put them on Q&A when our presenters will pick them up at the end. Now, back to you, Rob. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sylvia, and welcome again to everybody. It's a real pleasure to have you with us. I just want to say a few words about Duncan and his partnership with Rich Duckett. Extraordinarily, I met Duncan for the first time in Yangon a few months ago, February this year, but it feels as though I've known him for a very long time. And we are really grateful. I mean, the world's very grateful to Duncan and Richard for this partnership, because for the first time we have access to the detail of, as Sylvia says, one of the most dramatic special force operations in the entirety of the Second World War. And if you've read my book, A War of Empires, you'll know that I regard Operation Character to have been of dramatic strategic significance to Slim's and the 14th Army's victory in 1945. Duncan has always known about his grandfather's exploits because, of course, well, not of course, but you may not know that A Life of a Jungle Wallah was written by Peacock's widow, Duncan's grandmother, and the family were brought up on the stories of Edgar. But because of a number of restrictions at the time, not the entire story couldn't be told until now, until Richard's book. And Richard and Duncan met in the early 2012 or 2013. That was the start of the relationship. And then they went out together to Yangon for the unveiling of the plaque to Hugh Seagram in Rangoon Cathedral in 2017. And Duncan was also a trustee of the charity Help for Forgotten Allies, a charity that we know well and respect. And I think that's the background, all the background I need to give to Richard and Duncan coming together, and Richard being persuaded that this was an incredible story that needed telling. And that's the beginning of it. We need to remember Chiselbury as well for getting the publication sorted and underway, and for producing such an amazing book. That's all I think I need to say. Duncan, at the start, if you put on your life jacket through tonight's proceedings, don't worry, we'll simply switch to Richard. He can carry on the presentation, but I'm sure everything will go well. That's enough from me. Over to you, Richard and Duncan.
All right, good evening, everyone. Yeah, I didn't need much persuading to write this book. There's a fabulous story right here, and Duncan had been collecting as much information about his grandfather as he could for a long time. So what a privilege to be able to access all of that and put this together. So I hope you'll agree we've got a really special evening for you about to start. We've divided the talk into 6 sections, which you should be able to see on your screen there. We'll start with a brief SOE explainer and how the organisation got to the Far East. And then we'll sort of do as Meanwhile in Southern Rhodesia, and Duncan will pick up who was Edgar Peacock, who was his grandfather. Then we'll get on to joining up, going to Ceylon, and eventually getting to India, the period October 1940 to October 1942. Then really this hidden bit that's just so amazing that we've uncovered this, section 4 there, the jungle training pamphlets, and with 7 Indian Division, really exciting to have uncovered that. And that's preparatory to going out to the front of Kohima in Foul with P Force, P standing for Peacock, so Peacock Force on the Chindu in March 1943 to May 1944. So we're going to concentrate on that period rather than the Operation Character part, which we've spoken about quite a lot now. So we're really going to try and concentrate on how it got to what Rob said, the huge strategic significance of Operation Character and winning that accolade that we've given him of Britain's greatest SOE commander. So we're going to concentrate on how we got there and how that got everything ready for Operation Character. And I'd just like to say also at the start, one of the other most exciting things about doing this book was working out the grid references and then sourcing the maps and then getting together the maps. So tonight you're going to have access on the screen to some amazing maps. One day I've got to go out there and we've got to hike this. I'm so excited for that one day. Hopefully Burma will calm down, the civil war and end, and I can get out there. And we can retrace the footsteps of these patrols that we're going to take you through tonight. So there's some amazing maps coming your way on the screen tonight. And that was definitely one of many highlights of writing this book. But we're going to start with what I seem to be trademarking myself with the beginning of my my talks now with the Dad's Army logo. If you want to move it on, Duncan. Has that moved on? I can still see the old one. No, it's gone too far. Go back one. Yeah, so the Dad's Army bit. We're all sort of familiar with Dad's Army, irrespective of an age. And this is really how SOE came to be. Special Operations Executive, formed from a position of weakness. 1940, Britain had back to the wall, and we needed some way of striking back at Nazi-occupied Europe after being kicked off the continent. And I always have to show the picture of the Nazis looking across that great anti-tank ditch, the English Channel. As we prepared for invasion in this country, the auxiliary units were formed in case the Germans made it across. Of course, they never did. But we were going to be prepared for them. And so the next slide, I've just taken this out of Hugh Dalton's diary to sort of explain what SOE is all about. So it would be a secret or underground organisation. There would be no public announcement of my new responsibility being Hugh Dalton as the first minister in charge of SOE. And knowledge of the activities of the organisation would be kept within a very restricted circle. So it's very big on security at the start. And that relaxes later on, fortunately, because otherwise SOE wouldn't have been able to do what it did in Burma. As to its scope, sabotage was a simple idea. It meant smashing things up. I love that line. It just meant smashing things up. Subversion was a more complex conception. It meant the weakening by whatever covert means of the enemy's will and power to make war, and the strengthening of the will of his opponents, including in particular guerrilla and resistance movements. And of course, this is where Peacock comes in. It's all about the guerrilla movements out in Burma. That's the main course of Edgar's career in SOE. So while the Nazis were staring over the channel, what's going on over in southern Rhodesia? So just as they're staring over the channel, SOE is being formed on the other side of the world. Here is Edgar Peacock desperately trying to enlist, and this is where I'll hand over to Duncan.
Well, thank you, Richard, and welcome everyone. It's an honour for me to be here today. I'm just going to backpedal a little bit because here we are in southern Rhodesia. Edgar's 47, and how on earth did he get here? And who was he? And I think it's important just to run through that because that will tell us how he became the man he was, and therefore how he managed to do the things that he did. So Sylvia's already covered a fair bit of it in her introduction, but Edgar Peacock, as she said, he was born in 1893 in Nagpur in central India. He was the youngest of four brothers and the fourth generation of the Peacock family to live continuously in India since his great-grandfather had arrived in 1790 as a young Scotsman to find a better life. They moved from Nagpur up to Lucknow in Edgar's early years, where his father was a post office manager, and his two eldest brothers, when they became of working age, joined the Indian Railways as ticket inspectors. So they had a kind of a middle-class British upbringing in India. Unfortunately, tragically, in 1908, in the course of 1 year, the brothers lost both their mother and their father to a cholera epidemic. And at that point, Edgar really became a boarder at the nearby La Martiniere College, and that's where his upbringing came. It was a fairly austere and grand building. You can see some photos of it there, one from the past and one from 2024. It's still running, and it's still a fairly prestigious institution. It focuses on academic achievement and personal responsibility, sporting prowess, things like that. And here's some pictures my sister took when she visited it a couple of years ago. There's the great grand reception room with tiger skins on the walls, probably dating from around about the time that Edgar was there. And I like the picture at the bottom, which is the dormitory. I can't believe that it's changed very much since Edgar was sleeping in one of those beds. And there's just a small story I'd like to mention, which happened at the time, because I think it also gives an idea of Edgar's character from an early age. Apparently Edgar was keeping a snake in a box underneath his bed, and of course it got free one night and was found slithering over his next door companion, who didn't take kindly to that, and shouted loudly to get the bloody thing off me. And Edgar was completely unmoved and said, "Don't worry, it's not going to bite you, and even if it does, I milked it this morning, so it won't hurt much." So there you are. He was in the forest from an early age, picking up animals and tending to wounded birds and things like that. When he left that school, he began to move onto his love of the forests, and he studied at Dehra Dun Forestry Research Institute, which is up in northwest India. Again, a prestigious institution then and now. And he graduated from there in 1914 and got his first posting to Burma in July 1914. And of course, as we know, Second World War broke out less than 1 month later in August 1914, and Edgar thought he was going to get into the thick of the action. It was not to be. He was in a profession, even though he'd only just arrived, that was deemed to be reserved, and so he stayed in Burma. His loss was Britain's gain in the end, because he then spent 18 years traveling the length and breadth of that country, getting to know the geography, the plant life, the animals, and perhaps most importantly, the people that held sway, the local tribes, chiefs, etc. And on the way there, he indulged in his hunting skills. He became a great hunter. I grew up being told what a superb shot he was, and clearly he must have been. And he got himself the reputation as a great shikari, which is a great hunter. So much so that he was asked in 1920 to organise a royal hunt for some of the Prince of Wales staff. But then in his sort of mid to late 20s, he began to think that he should take a wife. And for whatever reason, he didn't look to one in Burma or in India. But aged 29 in 1922, he returned, or he took his first steps into the United Kingdom, never having been there before in his life. Failed in his task of finding a wife, but his secondary objective was to go down to South Africa and look at investing in some land there. And on the ship down, he met a young lady who herself considered herself to be a bit on the shelf. And they got together. He proposed to her, she accepted. And he then sailed back to Burma, saying he would call for her when he was in a position to provide her with a life there. And that took 2 years. So it took 2 years before he finally said, "Right, I'm ready, come over." And so she arrived on a warm, hot, humid April morning in 1924 into the Rangoon docks, was married in the afternoon, and by the evening she was on a train rattling her way north up to her first posting in Pyongyang. About a year later, their first child, my Aunt Joy, was born, and they lived in, by that point, a house in Moorlake, and here it is. It's a large house, isn't it, for a couple and a less than 1 year old daughter. Quite interesting. The picture on the left is one taken by my grandmother Geraldine in 1925, and the one on the right, we were lucky enough to be sent by somebody who attended Richard's talk in January and who had been to Burma in 2019. And this is the photograph of the house then. So it's still standing in remarkable repair, and still apparently being referred to as Peacock's house. So Peacock's fame reverberates throughout Burma really to this day. So during his time, Peacock went on many, many jungle tours. He took his family with him. There were no concessions made for that. And he was complained of by his fellow compatriots as spending more time in the jungle than he did at home. Here's a picture that he, at some point in his career, that he shot an elephant, a rogue elephant, and there's my grandmother posing on the carcass. Another photo of him with a buffalo around about 1926. But over the course of his career, he collected quite a collection of skins, and here is a display of them with my Aunt Joy standing in the background. And I remember one of these tiger skins adorning the floor of my mother's house in the late 60s, early 70s, until it finally fell apart. But it wasn't all about killing animals, and most of these animals had been terrorizing the villagers. He did kill for sport, but he also killed to protect the villagers, and he was, for quite a number of years, the game warden of the whole of Burma. He was also a pioneer, though, of photography, and he wrote several articles about that, talking some technical detail about lens selection and apertures and shutter speeds and things like that, as well as selecting a hide, how far away to be, how to make yourself comfortable for quite a long wait. I think he described this photograph he took of the tigress returning to a kill. He was there for 2 nights before he managed to get this shot. And going back to his Morlake days, I'll come back to that on a map in a bit, but it was from Morlake that he took his tours northwards into the Kabaw Valley in the Upper Chindwin. And even though he didn't know it at the time, he was learning the geography and understanding the country in which he was going to patrol and make his first special P-Force forays in the jungles of that part of the world. And here's a picture of him. They've just risen before dawn and they're about to set off on their trek in the Morlake area. And you can probably see there's my little Auntie Joy, only less than 2 years old, on a pony. She's going to be going along with them. Another photo they took at the time of the jungle in the Kabaw Valley. I'm not sure where this is, but it's entirely possible that that is the Yu River, which is a major feature of that area. So they had after marriage, they had an 8-year period of touring the jungles, and generally speaking, it was a happy time. They were in various parts of Burma. But for various reasons, that all came to an end, and possibly one of the major ones was that in the period 1930 to 1932, there was an uprising against British rule by a portion of the Burmese population. It's called the Burma Rebellion or the Sayasan Rebellion. And Edgar was involved in it to an extent in that he was posted to Maimyo, and at one point he organised a patrol to go and search out some dacoits or robbers who had murdered a British officer. And he intercepted a cartload of them. Whilst he was interrogating them, one of them stood up and delivered a severe machete or dao blow to his head. It cut right through his pith helmet and into his skull. They did manage to arrest the cartload, and they managed to get Edgar to hospital, although he wasn't expected to survive. It was that serious. He did survive. He did conceive my mother at that point, and the family decided to take early retirement from the Forestry Service and to go back to England, where Edgar had been asked to manage his mother-in-law's laundry business. So return they did. Probably not a good move looking back on it. Edgar was never suited for an office job. And Edgar's mother-in-law, you can see her on the left there, was a pretty formidable iron-willed woman, as was, well, Edgar was an iron-willed man, and there wasn't really room for it in the business. So they didn't see eye to eye, and he only lasted about 6 months before he threw his hand in and said, "I'm off." During that time, though, he did manage to write a book which was well received on game in Burma, and several articles for the Field magazine. But he sold up the family belongings and headed off to Africa, again telling his family, "I'll call for you when I'm ready." And about 2 years later, he did call for them. He'd been down there onto the land that he'd bought in 1922 and built himself a house. When I say built himself a house, he didn't just go to B&Q and order a few bricks. He actually had to make them himself. So we'll get his men to make them. Here's a picture at the top of the brick making area. And there is the small farmhouse which he built up in the Limpopo region of South Africa. They were there for about 5 years, and then Edgar announced that he had discovered the promised land of southern Rhodesia, and they moved up to Bulawayo, where he bought a small holding. And of course, that was in 1939, and we all know what happened next. War was declared. So almost as soon as they'd settled in, the Second World War started, and having missed out on the first one, Edgar was determined that he was going to get stuck in this time. And I'll hand over to Rich now to follow up on how that went. Richard. Oh, we can't hear you, Rich. You've gone mute again.
There we go. Edgar had missed the First World War because he was in Burma in a reserve profession. So he was desperate to take part in the Second World War. And he got very frustrated with how hard it was to join up. He wasn't the only older man who was getting very frustrated and wanted to join up. His partner through the war, if you like, was Major Eustace Poles, and this is probably where they first met, when they finally joined up together in Bulawayo. So they joined up July 1940, and they were both passing out as sergeants by October of 1940. Then Edgar is waved off to war by Geraldine, and he's going to East Africa, and she describes how she was keeping her emotions in, and she didn't want Edgar to see her cry. So instead she said, "You must come back a colonel." Of course, that's what he went and did. It's interesting to note, Baden-Powell of the scouting fame and the Boer War. It took him 21 years to become a full colonel. Edgar did it inside of 5 years because of the extraordinary circumstances of war, and because if he hadn't joined SOE, he wouldn't have been so rapid. But he needed promotion to take on the positions that he got once he finally made it to India. So before he made it to India, what was he doing? Well, he was out in Kenya, and he did his officer training course at Njoro in Kenya, and those dates you can see there. He got posted to the 54 Nyasaland Field Battery, 162 Regiment Royal Artillery. So he was a gunner. So he had gone to gunnery school, learned how to sight all the artillery, and then the East African Brigades were sent to the defence of Ceylon in March 1942. And on Ceylon, he used his jungle knowledge with Eustace Poles to go hunting for the pot for the Askaris that he was serving with and for his battery. His knowledge of the jungle also came in useful there for finding somewhere to base themselves that wasn't going to mean they all contracted malaria. There was a lot of illness in Ceylon amongst his Askaris, dysentery and cholera, because there was nothing there. They arrived on Ceylon, and it was a bit like Britain in 1940. There was no preparation for a Japanese invasion. So they spent the next sort of 8 months running around all over the island, trying to prepare for the invasion that never came, with very limited resources. And I'll just do my first reading here. This is, apart from all those wonderful photographs you've just seen, we're fortunate to have some of the letters and correspondence between Edgar and his wife Geraldine. And here's this one from Ceylon. He said, "You will have read in the papers of the air raids over Ceylon, and of course we are waiting to give the Japs a hot reception when and if they land here. Personally, I don't see why we should wait for them to come. In my poor opinion, we should have gone through to Burma before the rains came and hit them there. I know the overland routes down the old Chindwin and Irrawaddy, and I know what conditions in Burma will be during the rains from May to October. Damn these old fatheads who wouldn't let me join up till so late that I'm only a second lieutenant instead of being far more senior with a stronger say in the conduct of this Eastern campaign. It makes me furious to see the blunders that are due purely to the ignorance of local conditions." I think you get a true sense of his frustration there. He's not holding back in his letter to Geraldine, is he? But he's got 18 years of living in the Burmese jungle. He knows it, and he just wants to get back there. In October 1942, he is mysteriously whisked away. Ceylon, and another excerpt to his wife, Edgar said, "Edgar told Geraldine that manoeuvres in Ceylon under battle conditions were pretty uncomfortable, and that he was suffering from a boil and sciatica. And from Ceylon, he wrote, and this is how he gets to go to India eventually, "The big noise of our show spoke to me the other day on manoeuvres. He knows my record and how I joined as a private, etc. He frowned very fiercely and said, 'Ridiculous, ridiculous, with your record to be a gunner subaltern. Well, don't worry. I hope you'll wake up one morning and find yourself off where you want to go.'" And the quote on the slide there, "mysteriously whisked away." Edgar was mysteriously whisked away is how Poles described it. Over to you, Duncan.
Great. Thank you. Yes, and particularly thank you to Richard for uncovering all the stuff about Ceylon, because prior to his research, all I'd known that he'd been cooling his heels in Ceylon until he got to India, but I knew no more than that. And actually, I should have said earlier on, what you're hearing, what you're learning tonight, is actually things that have never been put before the public or in the public domain before, either because they were hidden in our family archives or because no historian had either discovered them or considered their importance. So thank you to Richard for all of that. Edgar was mysteriously whisked away. He did a intelligence course somewhere in India, and then he was tasked with lecturing in jungle warfare down in Karachi. I'm going to read you something in a minute because it gives you a great idea of how he felt, and he certainly was somebody to give his opinions forthrightly. But he was promoted to captain. He was put into warfare school, and despite being a little hesitant, he did get a very good report, which I'll just quickly read to you. So his report from his from his jungle warfare officers was such: a very capable, active, popular and efficient officer who has extensive experience of Burma and a good knowledge of the languages used in that country. He is capable of shouldering great responsibility and is suitable for an active intelligence appointment in a specialist capacity in connection with Burma. He would be very suitable as a division liaison officer in a forward formation or for organising guerrilla warfare. Well, something like that did happen, and but before that, he was lecturing, as we said, in jungle warfare. He condemned a great deal of what he saw in the documents that he was using. And indeed, they hadn't worked in 1942, and he thought he knew why. So he was heavily involved in rewriting the jungle warfare manual. And we can see the front cover it on the screen. He renamed it, or he had it renamed, to mirror his very favourite author, Rudyard Kipling, and it's now called The Jungle Book, and that's Edgar all over. This is what he used to train the 7th Indian Division. So he trained 7th Indian Division in India, which the jungles, he says, were not the same as Burma, but they would have to do. And then they were sent off to Burma. And if you know the history, they were involved in the Battle of the Admin Box up in the Arakan, which is seen as a turning point in the war in Burma. And in great part, I would like to think, it's because of the training that they received from Edgar Peacock. And Edgar then was able to go on and develop these techniques in his own force later on. But I'd just like to read, as I said, something which he was told to write in his post-war report in 1945 about guerrilla warfare and the tactics. And he says, "I welcome the opportunity to write on a subject with which I've been closely concerned both in 1930-32, the Burma Rebellion, and since late 1942 to the close of this war. A subject which will undoubtedly receive ever-increasing attention in the future, not only in the jungle, but over any broken terrain. In early 1943, I was privileged to lecture on jungle craft and jungle warfare to the 7th Indian Division and created some controversy by my condemnation of much that was written in the training pamphlet number 9, Jungle Warfare, and the principles advocated by some training teams, which to my mind tended to make troops road-bound and vulnerable to any really mobile enemy. I stressed repeatedly the need for mobility, which can only be achieved by a soldier who has been trained to live for at least 10 days on carefully selected rations carried by himself, and thereafter to live on the country for far greater periods as occasion might demand. It seemed to me that our strategy and our tactics revolved around our cumbrous motor and animal transport, and often quite unsuitable equipment, supplies and stores, and standardized battle drills, which were largely concerned with defense. Mobility, which favors large-scale deployment, quickness in maneuver, the choice of fighting on one's own ground, swift attacks and withdrawals, seemed to have been lost sight of and sacrificed to the gods of red tape and to the lethargy of many leaders whose tactics depended on their own physical disabilities or disinclination to face discomfort and hardship. Mechanization favored such tendencies, and in broken country confined our strategy and tactics to the main roads and paths. In other words, we became road-bound. And then finally, he says, during the Manipur campaign, the immobility and road-bound state of our troops were pathetic as compared with the mobility of the Japs. Many of us who served in that campaign would appreciate what might have happened if the Japs had been able to push in a division or two of fresh troops to reinforce the 3 understrength divisions which pushed us back from the Chindwin to the Manipur plain. Harsh words indeed, and he does go on to say a few more, which I won't read out. But what I will do, if you'll permit, is just read you a couple of bits from the Jungle Book, the training manual, because in here is Edgar's voice coming through loud and clear, it seems to me, and how he regarded the jungle as a partner, really, a place that could sustain you rather than being an adversary that you had to fight through alongside the enemy. So movement in the jungle, he says. There is a technique for moving in the jungle. Blundering forward only leads to scratches, bruises, and loss of direction. Go slow and watch your step. Thick leather or canvas gauntlets are a great help, and some form of knife is essential. The aim should be to move silently without causing any commotion of the animals. Monkeys and squirrels are easily disturbed, and their cries warn the jungle that something strange is on the move. It is possible to cut through the creepers quickly without causing the leaves and branches to shake. Part of the jungle, don't try to push through it. There are many animals that make and follow game trails. These trails never run straight. They wind about and crisscross the jungle. They frequently lead to waterholes, clearings, or salt licks. The smaller ones may lead into larger ones or merely vanish. Elephant trails are often wide as bridle paths. Use these trails and only strike across the jungle when there is no likelihood of the trail being of assistance. The larger game trails are not purposeless. They follow the easiest ways across the hills and rivers and swamps, and near them are opportunities for supplementing the meat ration. Don't, however, follow game trails blindly. Be sure that the game trail is going where you want to go and not where the game want to go. And then he goes on to talk about when you get lost. In the event of direction being lost, do not get flustered. Sit down and think the problem out, paying particular attention to the position of the sun. Climb a tree and study the landscape. Do anything rather than give way to the urge to hurry on at all cost and in any direction. This urge is one which assails those who believe themselves to be lost. And then finally, and I think this is important because he was behind the lines for extended periods, and this is how he didn't get found. He says, do not sleep near a track, game trail, stream, or on a ridge. These are jungle highways at night and you may be disturbed. Go to the side of the hill away from the game tracks. Choose a dense thicket. Make yourselves comfortable and rest quite easy in mind. The chances of anything finding you and disturbing you are quite remote. So there's just a small part of his jungle book and jungle training, and this is clearly where he went on his own journey in the jungles of the Upper Chindwin. And with that, I'll hand back to Richard, who will tell us more.
Okay, so all you just heard, it's now time for Edgar to put into action. So before he'd been whisked away to spend 2 months training 7 Indian Division, SOE thought that they'd claimed their man, but they got him eventually after his time with 7th Indian Division was over. And, well, after the retreat, of course, the army had to reorganise itself, and so did SOE. So SOE regrouped, and in August 1942, Major Forrester was in charge of Burma Country Section, and he wrote an appreciation for SOE operations in Burma, in which he advocated for the deployment of Burma forestry officers to those regions of the country which they knew and which would be unoccupied by enemy forces. He proposed 8 parties be introduced into Burma to collect intelligence, number 4 of which was a party of officers based on Imphal for penetration to Moorlake. Where have we just heard that Edgar was? Back when he was Game Warden and Chief Conservator of Forests. So that's the plan for getting someone into that area as early as August 1942. You know, right in the wake of the retreat. What were they doing there? What were P-Force doing there? Well, I think the Poles diary gives us a really great little insight. So these are Eustace Poles, who have said that they joined up together in Bulawayo, and this is from some of his redrafted handwritten notes. He says of P-Force, "We went to work teaching our growing force of volunteers, whom we led on armed reconnaissances, probing enemy strong points along the Chindwin River, and from time to time ambushing Japanese fighting patrols in the Kabaw and Chindwin valleys and in the high mountainous teak forests, separating them." He writes that, "I joined him, Edgar, in the Manipur Hills overlooking the Chindwin River. We two had great fun and games. Our role was practically an independent one, and we at once set about raising our own private army." So they were sent there to recruit men like you can see in the photographs here. These are all men that were recruited on the Chindwin, and the ones in uniform are the ones that went back on Operation Character. So they are behind the lines ahead of 20 Indian Division, across the Kabaw Valley, going across the Chindwin, and recruiting as many of what they were described as junglies as they could. Just want to pick up on what their orders were, because it gives you a real good sense of what they're doing and why this is important. Why this is so important is because SOE didn't have a really good reputation, and they needed the trust of the army. And as Edgar said himself, you know, we it's up to us to now justify the confidence placed in us. And this is what, after having meetings in Calcutta, this is what he wrote to Poles. He said, "The coordination of our work with those of Forward Army and other units rests in the division and brigade commanders, who issue from time to time orders calculated to prevent overlapping and clashes with friendly patrol. So we have coloured identification ribbons for certain days of this week. The measure of our success will not be read in unrelated actions, but in cooperative efforts timed to assist far greater army movements. The need for close and tactical liaison is obvious." And this is crucial. Special forces have to work in tandem with the army. And so Edgar got this before many others in SOE did. He understood how he needed to work with the army to make the magic work, which came later. Within this frame, there'll be plenty of room for opportunist action, whether in deep penetration, sabotage, demolition on enemy lines of communication, or plain killing, but none for unadvised actions which may upset the plans of army commanders. So he's really sensitive. We're working with the army here. We've got to get rid of this ridiculous security cloaking our activities, and we've got to work in concert with Slim's forces. So and this is really important to what happens in 1945, and Slim taking on SOE. He needed a bit of convincing, but finally Slim made the correct decision, and that's where this is all building up to go. In February 1944, just on the eve of the Japanese attack, the P-Force go out on patrol, and they get caught up in the attack on Imphal and Kohima. But this is what they were up to. Just on at that point, they were to go and they've agreed with the general officer commanding 4 Corps. Edgar was given a ceiling of 150 recruits, although men to be used as agents were not to be included in this number. All patrols had to be authorised by the Corps commander, and all intelligence reported. The training was to focus on the handling of Burmese irregulars and their reaction to control. All aspects of living under jungle conditions, all aspects of jungle warfare, with particular stress on setting up hidden bases, and the use of weapons in the jungle, and the adaptation of explosives and mechanisms to jungle warfare, and their coordination with native forms of ambushes and booby traps. I think that gives us a really good sense of what they are doing in this in the Chindwin Valley and the Kabaw Valley. They're learning and they're recruiting and they're setting up intelligence networks, and this is this tremendous base of knowledge that they're building up ready for 1945. But I'm going to hand over back to Duncan now for something that really shows Edgar again for what a remarkable man he was.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Rich. Edgar made many patrols during the course of his time in the Upper Chindwin, some of which have survived and many of which have not, the reports of. And they do make fascinating reading. This one that I'm about to describe would be his last one, and undoubtedly the most arduous. And it's really actually one which deserves its own movie, I think, in its own right, because it became one of the most epic rescues of the Second World War. And I couldn't say more than that, because there were undoubtedly many rescues, and lots of them were epic and brave. But this one was certainly quite extraordinary. I don't know if you're familiar with the Swiss cheese analogy, but basically it is that for any disastrous event to occur, there really have to be a series of smaller events which go unnoticed or unchallenged. And this is certainly one of them. So the Japanese started their long-awaited invasion of India, Operation Yugo, on the 8th of March 1944, a week early, layer number 1. Peacock Force set out on patrol a week later on the 13th of March 1944, and they were set for a long period of time. They were heavily weighed down with explosives and ammunition and guns and the makings of booby traps and very heavy packs of 60 pounds plus. Right from the word go, their radios didn't work for reasons I won't go into. So that's Swiss cheese layer number 2. They were out of contact with the army from the moment they set out. And then, of course, the army were being pushed back. Whether Peacock knew the plan that the army were going to be making a fake fighting retreat or not, we don't know. But clearly it wasn't going all that well. Let me just turn to the map that we've got on the right-hand side. Down at the bottom, you can see Moor Lake. That's where Edgar Peacock was based back in 1925-26. And then this whole area here is where Peacock was patrolling. Thang Dort up at the top, just to give it a sense of scale, is about 60 miles from Moor Lake, and Tamu about 45 miles. Imphal is off the map up here to the northwest, the other side of this range of mountains. And here's the Kabaw Valley, a malaria-infested place, if you listen to some, with the U River running through it. This was Edgar's backyard, if you like. This is where he was patrolling. And as so often had been the case, he was making, on this occasion, for his headquarters here, at the top of a 2,500 to 2,600 foot mountain range. What happened was that as a part of the Japanese push, the place was infested with Japanese and gunfire, and the bamboo caught fire at one point, creating sounds exactly like rifle fire. And the booby traps which they'd set needed to be inspected and checked. And Captain Gibson, one of Peacock's officers, went down to do that. And in the process, was blown up. He had about 20 shrapnel wounds from his left heel up to his left shoulder, completely unable to walk and badly injured. They had to get him up this steep slope back up to their mountaintop base, and clearly they had to do something with him. The patrol was then abandoned, and they decided that they had to return. Of course, they didn't know where the army was anymore. They knew that they were retreating. They could see that, but they hadn't any radio contact. And so they made the decision to destroy or bury any unnecessary stores and to make their way back to try and get help for Captain Gibson. Here's one of the maps that Richard was referring to earlier on, and it shows us the base of P-Force, the area where the accident happened, and the route that they're retracing back. They set off in the late afternoon, evening of the first day, so they didn't get very far that night, and then the following day they continued on their way back along this ridge. And I'll just read what Eustace Cole said in his diary. We're so lucky. We've got the contemporary diary of Eustace, which he was keeping day by day at the time. And we've also got the letters that Peacock wrote to his wife later on. But Eustace writes of this retreat, the section of advance guard, which was 4 men with dars cutting away for John's litter. Next, the litter carried by 6 men, and in the rear, the rest of the force supplying relief at the litter and guarding our rear. Edgar in a very bad way, heat exhaustion extreme. In spite of this, he keeps ahead with the advance guard and is continually checking up on the men and generally organising. A wonderful example of the will driving the sick body. Camped near water below Pagantong. Progress for the day about 1 mile per hour. So extremely hot in the months leading up to the monsoon, and very slow progress. So they carry on carrying Peacock along the ridge until they eventually meet up with the Sitong Road, which makes life slightly easier, although of course the Japanese are all around them, so how much they were able to actually walk down the road or not, I wouldn't like to say. They went through an abandoned Gurkha camp and onwards, and through down out of the mountains, down into the Kabaw Valley, where they reached Yan'an and an old guerrilla base of Peacock's from months previously. At this point, it was quite clear that they couldn't carry John Gibson any further. The men were absolutely exhausted. They didn't know where the troops were, and it would have jeopardized the entire party. Let me just read to you what Edgar wrote to his wife later on. He says, I do not like to think of the days that followed. We made a bamboo stretcher and carried him for 3 days over hills and through jungle till the men were exhausted and our food nearly finished. Then the scouts found the Japs, and that night it rained heavily, as if our sufferings were not already sufficient. Heaven only knew how far our troops were, and the noise of bombing and gunfire made it appear as if they'd gone right away. To try and go on carrying John would have meant inevitable disaster, and to leave him was likewise impossible. If we could only know where our troops were and the Jap strength, we might try. The only thing to do was to leave him hidden temporarily with all the food and water necessary, and to try to break through quickly, find out the battle position, and then come back for him. This we did, marching into the jungle at night. But the fates did not relent, and Eustace fell down a steep place and cracked a rib, and could only move with great pain, and it rained again. And all that day we walked, slipping between Jap patrols and making for where I hoped to find our troops. I dared not fight for fear of being committed and thus risking the chance to get through and bringing help for John. The next day, thank the Lord, we found our own troops, but to the last minute we did not know whether they were Japs or not. And this was up in this area here. So they followed the green route here up to these mountains and started climbing up a dry chalk. And eventually they heard the sound of elephant bells, I believe, and they sent a couple of their men up to find out who and what they were. And they thankfully found that they were a group of Gurkhas who welcomed them in. Okay, so Edgar at that point leaves most of his men there with the Gurkhas, and he gets some motor transport where he comes down the main road, which is now still in the hands of the British, to Moray, where the headquarters are. And there he goes to see the commander of 20th Indian Division, somebody that he already knows very well, General Gracie, and asks him if he can have some help to go and get Edgar back. And this provided the quote that Gracie gave after the war, which goes something along the lines of, when Edgar came to ask me for help to get a wounded officer back, I thought it was madness. But if no thought for yourself and loyalty is madness, then give me madness every time, he says. And he gave Edgar a platoon of Gurkhas, and after minimum amount of sleep, 10 hours or something, Edgar then went on down the road, back through enemy lines, back to where John Gibson was, not really expecting to find him alive, to be quite frank, but they did, and he was slightly recovered. And so they picked him up and carried him back again, back through the lines and back through to Moray, where he was taken to hospital, recovered, and actually returned to do SOE work in Malaysia and won himself an MC later on. So an extraordinary story of courage and endurance, and crossing the enemy lines 3 times in the space of 24 hours. Eustace wrote after the war to Edgar's widow, "We got through, all but Gibson." And it was then that Edgar went back from Moray through Tamu to the U, down the main road, blatantly passing through the Japanese army to effect an epic rescue. God knows how he did it. I don't to this day. Our men had reached the limit of their endurance, and I was a casualty, only just managing to crawl home. So Edgar borrowed a platoon of Gurkhas and did the job alone. We shouldn't forget that these are extremely fit men who'd reached the limit of their endurance. So there you have it. That's the kind of man that Edgar was. That's the area in which he was operating, and that's just one and the last of his patrols in that area. The group then went on to support 20th Indian Division in the Battle of Imphal on the Palel Road by setting up aggressive forward ambushes. Let me now hand back to Richard, who will take us further and give us perhaps a brief insight into what came next, which is actually the crowning glory of Peacock's career. Rich?
Yeah, I'm just conscious of time, so I hope everyone stays with us. 97 just became 96 as we approach the hour, so I'll be very brief here. I think hopefully you get a good idea of how everything with P-Force there is setting the stage for the extraordinary operation character in 1945. We are lucky enough to have that photo there on the top right. They've just landed there, February 1945. Someone had taken a camera with them on that very first drop and photographed all these men who'd been recruited on P-Force operations on the Chindwin. There they are now, more than 400 miles behind the lines, waiting to receive Slim's order to start smashing the Japanese and make that contribution to the reclaiming of Rangoon in May 1945. And just to finish, Duncan read the bit about how Edgar berated the British Army for becoming road-bound and how we should have been more like the Japanese. Well, now it turns around the other way, and Edgar just couldn't believe that the Japanese made themselves road-bound in 1945, and they were able, with all that training, all that knowledge of the jungle, to absolutely smash the Japanese divisions as they tried to retreat south and regroup to block Operation Extended Capital as it rushed down towards Rangoon. So we'll leave it there and hand it over to Sylvia.
Thank you, Rich. That was wonderful. I don't know, Rob, do you want to pick up anything?
Well, simply to say that there haven't been any questions put on the Q&A, but there's some very interesting points raised by a number of people. One by Robert Albright, who we know well. I just read this out if you haven't seen it. My father shared some similarities with Peacock, having lived in India for nearly 20 years by 1943 and being 40 years old in 1944. And many of the points in Peacock's training manual were related to me by Dad, including how to move quietly through the jungle. I mean, as a soldier, I did the jungle warfare training course, and I remember also being told to part the jungle, not to bash your way through it. It's a nuance, isn't it? But this is interesting hearing this from Robert, including how to move quietly through the jungle. He also said the Japanese were noisy. Well, he's not the only one to say that the Japanese were noisy. They were not the jungle trained supermen that some people believed them to be. He then says, Dad joined V-Force and if not trained by Peacock, would certainly have used his manual. The manual absolutely is remarkable. It was one of the most formative training documents that the Indian Army and the British armies used in 1943 and 1944. But that's all for me. No questions. Back to you, Sylvia.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rob. And thank you very much, Richard and Duncan. That was really super. I was going to pick up the jungle training manual as well. I thought that was just brilliant. And I'd love to read the whole thing if it exists. But what a man and what a story. And thanks so much for being here and telling it tonight. And for those of you who want to read more on the subject, you can purchase a copy of Jungle Warrior from our online shop, as Mel's already pointed out. Thank you. It's beautifully published by Chiselbury and with a great foreword by Lord Richards, former Chief of Defence Staff and fellow Royal Artillery officer. This book is worth a lot more than its £22 cover price. So do look out for it. Now, on to our KET news, which I can't wait to impart. Some of you will know. I know, Robert, we have written to you already, and I'm sure there are more of you there. But I think all of you know that our work in Nagaland has been on hold for the last couple of years, but we are now thrilled that we can announce a new initiative which we're launching as we speak. It's enabling us to resume our work in Nagaland, assisting young Nagas with their education. We've formed a partnership with a Naga NGO called the Eleutheros Christian Society, and we've agreed to fund a mobile teaching unit, initially for a period of 3 years. This mobile unit will reach some of the poorest and most rural villages where there is a scarcity of teaching professionals and where subject teachers are in short supply, particularly in maths and science. 10 middle schools have been targeted, and our goal is to reach between 900 and 1,000 children aged between 8 and 14, with the goal to help them attain grade level numeracy and science literacy. More information obviously can be found on our website, and our annual newsletter is winging its way to you as I speak. But this is such an exciting move forward for us and means that we can once again fulfill the aims and ambitions of our founding fathers by giving back to the descendants of those Nagas, assisting them with their educational needs. We've also news about our bursary programme, and as many of you will know, we launched this programme last January and awarded the first 2 bursaries this summer to Anushka and Kimaya. And we've now opened applications for 2026 with one major change to the criteria, and we're delighted to confirm that applications are now also open to students living in Nagaland who have an offer of a place at a UK university. Application forms can be found on our website, along with further information about the programmes, along with relevant T's and C's. Should you wish to donate to either programme, the teaching unit and all the bursaries, please do go to our website where the donate button will take you through to the right place. Alternatively, of course, feel free to email me at any time with any questions that you have, and I'll be delighted to be in touch with you. And then when you go on our shop, you'll also find our online store on the website full of gorgeous Naga made items just ready for the Christmas stocking, all made in Nagaland, many in actual real Naga homes where weaving is their main source of income. So every purchase made will help the Naga economy in some small way. Our online bookshop also has stock of all the books featured in our webinar programme this year. And of course, most of Rob Lyman's titles are also available through this link. The publishers are kind enough to offer KET a discount so that any purchase you make through us, half of the amount you pay will go to Nagaland to help a student. Well, as I said, that's the last webinar from us in 2025. If I can assist with any further information on any of the projects mentioned tonight, please don't hesitate to get in touch. You know where I am. Otherwise, our next webinar is on 22nd of January 2026, when Dr. Philip Woods will give a fascinating presentation on the subject of the media in the Burma campaign.
A great book. That'll be a great webinar.
Excellent. Well, from all of us, thank you so much for joining us tonight. All seek your best wishes. Have a good month and we'll see you next year. Thanks so much.
Happy Christmas.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.